think about that. We had no preseason games last year at all. Remember how sloppy some of the football was to start the season last year? I feel like I can promise you it will not be as sloppy this year. Okay? I feel pretty confident in that. So we're going to keep talking the football right now. We'll get to more of your messages a little bit later in the show. Text board 609-403-0973. Priority messaging into the show. DM the show through the 973 ESPN mobile app. It's free. Thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. And joining us right now on YouTube and Twitter to talk more about football and the Eagles and more, it is the football scientist. KC Joyner joins us live here on a Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. KC, good to see you. How you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. And you know what? KC, I'm happy we have football. You know, with last week, we have football in some form, either NFL or college football, every week from the beginning of August to the middle of February. So, KC, I'm happy.
Oh, I'm thrilled. It feels so much back to, it's hard to say that in today's day, but feels so much back to normal to actually have the preseason games, actually have the Hall of Fame in 2 days worth of Hall of Fame Hall of Fame ceremonies and such. It's fantastic. And just be able to see the opening kickoff game. It just, can't wait.
Yeah, my only negative about the Hall of Fame is that whole thing where they were like, oh, we got to keep it short. And I love that Peyton made a joke about it, but I kind of understand they had to limit these guys because in the past you had Ray Lewis having a sermon on the stage for an hour. So I understand they had to limit them, but there's a part of me that almost felt like some of the guys felt rushed on Saturday and Sunday.
I would agree with that. And the thing is that you avoid the Ray Lewis situation, but you miss some of the good situations. There are people out there taking no disrespect against these people as players, anybody contributors to the Hall of Fame, they belong. There are some times that they shouldn't be up there for more than 6 minutes of talking. Yet there are other people who, if they're up for 6, you want them up for 60. So yeah, I couldn't agree more there.
I could have had more Drew Pearson, honestly, over the weekend. I love that guy. He's just, if anybody's got energy, it's Drew Pearson, to say the least.
He could have spent a couple minutes talking about how during the Hail Mary game he did a push off at the end there. That was an illegal play. He should have been called for offensive pass interference. But yeah. Spoken as a Steelers fan. So.
Spoken as a Steelers fan. Well, speaking of the Steelers, the Eagles did play the Steelers on Thursday night. And, Casey, what is something that you look for in the preseason? What are the things that when you see a team play in the preseason, are you looking for certain players? You're looking for certain situations? What is the best way to evaluate NFL preseason?
I like to look at it like a coach. I mean, a lot of coaches don't care too much about the preseason. Like Sean McVay, he said there's no way Matthew Stafford will even play it down. He's resting a ton of starters. You can tell that McVay is trying to develop backups. So when you're looking at him, you're looking at, okay, you're trying to develop backups, and we're trying to see what you're trying to do with your backups. But the people who are going to put their starters out there for a time, the thing you're looking for, the thing I'm looking for at least, is what are you trying to do? Because usually you're going to try and work on things you're good at. You're going to try and get in the game. But as a coach, you're also trying to work on things that maybe you're not as good at. So, okay, I'm going to have you throw passes or try a play that we need to get a little more work in. Maybe we need to see something live, and maybe we've done this in practice, and it hasn't worked quite as well in practice. We want to try it in a game to know, can we put this in a regular season game? So I'm interested to see what coaches want to get out of their players, because I'll give you an example from that Steelers game, from that Steelers Cowboys preseason game. They wanted to see Najee Harris get out there, and heard Tomlin talk about it. He said, I want to see him get into a groove of preparing for a game and getting into a game. It's like, whatever he likes about Najee Harris, I think he realizes that Harris is still a rookie and needs to get through some of those rookie jitters of playing in a game. So they're looking for him to do that. So it can be situational depending on every team.
Now, the other thing you mentioned the Steelers, before we get to the Eagles, I just want to mention this. I find the whole quarterback situation interesting for the Steelers because they're getting a lot of run to Rudolph, Haskins, and Dobbs. And those are three guys who have NFL starts under their belt. So it's interesting to see how they're kind of shuffling those guys around, because I'm assuming at least the backup job is between Rudolph and Haskins. And it seems like so far Haskins has outperformed Rudolph.
With all the stuff that Haskins has had, he had the off-field incident a few weeks ago, and with all of that, you say, "Man, geez, why in the world did the Steelers go after Haskins?" And we're seeing that as fans, we're going, "Okay, well, this is a sign that this guy's maybe not up to it." But obviously, when you see him play in the preseason, it's all right. The talent is still there. The guy's raw because he only played one season at Ohio State, so. Talent's very raw there, but you can see why he's there. I hate to say it for Josh Dobbs too, because Josh Dobbs he's what is he, an astrophysicist or he's a rocket scientist?
Aerospace engineer.
There you go, rocket scientist. Yeah. And I'd like to see him be able to play in the NFL, but it looks like based on that preseason game that the Haskins obviously is definitely in front of him, and so is Rudolph too. So it looks like the Steelers, they're not going to keep Thor. So it looks like that was the end of Josh Dobbs' Steelers tenure, probably.
Yeah, and I assume Dobbs just hangs around until the end of the preseason just so they have an arm out there. So Now, flipping over to the quarterback with the Eagles, you and I were texting about this. I liked what I saw from Jalen Hurts. And I think the biggest thing to me with Hurts is, yes, he's in his fourth different offense in 40 years between Alabama, Oklahoma, Doug Peterson, and Sirianni. But it seems like every year he grows, he evolves, he adds something to the tool belt. We kind of put a little superhero spin on it. And to me, I like that because it shows that he's not stagnant. Like one of the problems people have with a guy like Lamar Jackson coming out of college was he was really not polished as a passer. Kyler Murray, he had limitations as a passer. Russell Wilson, people were wondering, how quickly he's going to pick up another offense. And it seems like a guy like Jalen Hurts, second year in the NFL, he is really focused on developing as a passer.
He is, and Sirianni's kind of made it clear that, okay, he's my quarterback, but he's setting a standard. Like he's got to reach this bar. I mean, he can do a lot of things, and I know I can incorporate the quarterback running game with him. I know there's things I could do with him, is what Sirianni's thinking. But he says, okay, well, you have to be able to do some other things passing him. I think that Sirianni's going to know that they can lean on the ground game. We can talk about that a little more in just a second. I think he knows this. So as far as he can take this offense, as far as Hurts can go throwing the ball, and I think he's going to challenge him to do those things. And that's why I think he's going to put things – we talked just a second ago, what he doing in the preseason. I bet Sirianni during the preseason wants to look at Hurts and go, okay, I want to know I'd like to see you in certain game situations. I'm not saying he's going to put him into the fourth quarter as a comeback situation or something of that nature, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to find situational things to go, okay, well, if it's 4th and 3, maybe we're going to see if we can do what the Chiefs did in that playoff game. We're going to see if we can, if you can hit a pass like that, if we're going to be aggressive and try and find other things that we can trust Jalen Hurts to do, because this offense is still going to go as far as he can go. The running game will be fine, but as far as the offense as a whole, the passing game, it's only going to go as far as he can go. So they are going to have to challenge him to do some things that maybe, again, you might not be that aggressive in the preseason normally, but I think they need to see, because Sirianni has to have an answer to his question of how aggressive can I be with this offense?
Well, you mentioned the running game. I'm glad you brought that up because you look at Sirianni and offensive coordinator Steichen's backgrounds. But the Chargers and Colts, they used all their running backs. It wasn't just a one-man situation. In Indianapolis, people talk about Jonathan Taylor, but Nyheim Hines got a lot of run to the point where people were putting him in their fantasy lineups. Out there in San Diego, it wasn't just Melvin Gordon. It was 3 other guys out there. So you have 2 offensive coaches and the head coach and the coordinator who are both going to use running backs. This is going to benefit the Eagles because you saw it on Thursday night. Jordan Howard, huge pass block. Kenneth Gainwell, first down run, catching out of the backfield. We know what Miles Sanders can do. So I'm going to assume that the Eagles are going to use all their running backs in this offense.
I would think so. I do fantasy football stuff, obviously, and I've been starting to move Boston Scott up my ranks too, because I'll tell you something, a couple things about the Eagles running game. One, last year, I have a metric called good blocking rate. It measures how often an offense gives its ball carriers quality run blocking. Believe it or not, this surprised me when I first saw it. But again, this is something that goes through a deep dive review of the 2020 running game. The Eagles had the best good blocking rate in the league by like a few percentage points.
Wow.
They were that good. And you're talking, they had 14 different offensive line combinations. So Stoutland, their offensive line at run game coordinator coach, does a fantastic job. So you give him players he's got coming back this year. The story of the offensive line they got coming back this year. You have to figure there's going to be an upgrade there. they're probably not going to have 14 different offensive line combinations this year. It took a huge confluence of circumstances to make that happen. You don't send an NFL record like that when you don't want, unless you have just a massive amount of injuries. So they're going to be healthier. They're already going to have talent returning. We know what Sanders can do, but Boston Scott, one of the things I'm looking for this offseason, I was great in the running game, is what type of vision does this back have? What type of how good is he at seeing the hole? How good is he at being able to cut back? How good is he at making adjustments on the run? Derrick Henry is probably the best. James Robinson is probably second best. It's a very small sample size. I thought Boston Scott was probably like just a half step behind them as far as his ability to read defenses on the run. As far as being able to say, okay, we're doing outside zone, and do I go outside? Do I cut it here? Do I go back inside? His vision of being able to see what he needed to do on a play or making an adjustment on the fly that, hey, I've decided to make this cut, but you know what? This is probably the cut I should have made. I need to cut it back inside. He did that. He was phenomenal at doing that. Again, small sample size, and you're not going to be able to rely on him. He's not going to be like a bell cutback. I'm not saying he's Derrick Henry in that respect. But as far as his ability to read defenses, he's superb at that. So if you take him and Sanders, and they can probably, because of that, and because of Sanders' durability history, I would think they don't want to rely just on one back. And I think because of Sirianni's history, I think that we're going to want to lean on the ground game. Plus, you've got Hurts and what he can do in the ground game, too. I wouldn't be surprised to see Eagles. They're not going to be like the Ravens and run the ball 500 times, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them easily in the top 10 of rush attempts this year.
KC Joyner, the football scientist, joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN at KC Joyner TFS on Twitter. Of course, you can hear him throughout the full football season on the Sports Bash, previewing and recapping every week of the NFL season here on 97.3 ESPN. Casey, you mentioned the fantasy aspect. Real quick side note on that. I heard someone mention that if you're going to draft a quarterback in fantasy, you want it to be a quarterback who can run a little bit, because they pointed to the fact that even Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers gain over 200 rushing yards a year. And the point they were making is that Jalen Hurts could have a lot of value, because even if he doesn't get you a lot of touchdowns per se, the rushing yards can have a lot of value in the PPR. So explain that to folks a little bit.
For quarterbacks, the problem is you want to at least have I'm always a big advocate in fantasy football, setting the floor, where you want to have whatever players you have at your position, that if you draft an RB1, you want to have an RB1 that an RB1, so that you set a floor, that you're not getting RB2 production of your RB1, et cetera, et cetera. There are different ways you can do that. I mean, you don't have to necessarily do that, but I'm really a big fan of making sure you set the floor. The problem at quarterback is, if you don't get, you say 200 yards, okay, that's 20 points, maybe a couple of touchdowns. If you're not getting 20 to 30 points in production out of your quarterback in a running game, and it can be, hey, if it's, you may get 100, but you get a couple, 3 touchdowns because they put you on sneaks at the goal line and things. It could be things like that. If you're not getting 20 or 30 points out of your quarterback over the course of a season, it's just really hard to make that up in the passing game. You have to throw a lot to make it up. If you have a quarterback who is going to, who has that, and if you're talking 30 points in the passing game, okay, 4 points per touchdown, you got to throw a couple, 3 touchdowns, you got to throw for, 200 yards. I mean, it's not easy to make up, whereas a couple hundred yards is only 20 yards per game. And if you get 3 touchdowns, it's a touchdown every 4 games. So it's where you want to at least get that level of production with somebody like Hurts. The thing is, if you get a quarterback, like I've got this quarterback system I use, this algorithmic system for grading fantasy quarterbacks. It doesn't take long for fantasy points in the running game to just shoot you right up the rankings. You can go, even a guy like Trey Lance. I had him in my overall grades pretty low, but I have an upside grade for a player too. In my upside grade, not long ago, he was ranked 9th in upside grade. Like if he gets in there and plays even half the season, he gets 500 rushing yards, 400 rushing yards, his numbers could skyrocket up to that point where he's a top 10 quarterback. So rushing yards for quarterbacks, rushing production adds up really quickly, and if you don't have it, it's hard to make up.
Quick question about the Eagles defense before we get some other NFL topics. Jonathan Gannon comes from the backgrounds of Mike Zimmer and Eberflus over there with the Colts, so we know no more wide 9. We saw a concept of it on Thursday. Obviously, they're going pretty vanilla, but we saw the Eagles, they weren't afraid to bring the blitz. They weren't afraid to, at least bring a little more pressure from other positions than what Jim Schwartz used to do. So I got to ask you, how can the change in the defense benefit an Eagles team that last year there were times they got completely eviscerated on the second and third levels of the defense on pass plays? So how can the change of the defense prevent them being embarrassed like they were last year?
A couple things the Eagles have had trouble with over the years. Actually, when you go to that wide nine, you've got the wide, the wide nine technique. Your ends are going to be so wide, you could be gashed up the gut, and I think it spreads your defense out just a little too much. I'm going to say you're overplaying, because again, you use it situationally and such, but you are really overplaying for the outside zone, for the like what we call the wide zone and things, where you're just playing too much for that, and you can get gashed up the middle. But I think the biggest thing the Eagles are going to want to do, you can prevent all big plays in the passing game. And the Eagles, obviously, like every team, wants to do that. I think one of the things they're going to concentrate on this year is stopping big plays in the ground game, because for years, we've been talking about that on the show the last 3 or 4 years, that the Eagles will rank really well. They've always concentrated on saying, we're going to run gap, we're going to get upfield against the run, we're just going to be really aggressive. And when we do this, you're going to have one of the best good blocking rates. I talked about that metric. We're going to have the best good blocking rates allowed on defense, meaning that when you run the ball against us, you're not going to have very much success. You're not going to be very productive you're not going to get consistent ground games, because we're defeating your blocks. The problem was, when you did get a good run against the Eagles, when you did get good blocking, they were getting a lot of times close to 10 yards per carry. I mean, and you can't allow that. Meaning, if you get good blocking against the Eagles, you were going to get big gains. And when teams saw that and realized, okay, and there's a variety of factors that could do that. It can be that but a lot of times it's your safeties aren't very good at coverage. You're not shedding blocks enough. You're doing different things. You're missing tackles, whatever it is. If an offense knows, if we get good blocking against you, we can get nearly 10 yards per carry, they're going to keep doing it. And the Eagles want to keep teams from doing that. So I'll bet that's something that they concentrate pretty heavily on, making sure they don't allow the big gains of the ground game. And it might be that you get more consistent ground gains. Maybe you get they get a higher good blocking rate, but overall, I bet the net's going to be a positive for them.
Let's get to some of the other teams around the NFC East, because I'm curious what your thoughts on them. First, start with the teams on Hard Knocks. So history tells us that if you're on Hard Knocks, you don't go to the Super Bowl. There's never been a team that's been on Hard Knocks going to the Super Bowl. So you got that going against the Cowboys. Also, according to ESPN stats and info, the last 10 times the Cowboys have been favored to win the division in Vegas, they only won the division once. So you now have two precedents that are going against the Cowboys. So, Casey, what are the Dallas Cowboys in 2021?
I'm curious to see the Cowboys a few years ago. Remember a few years ago when they had the dominant offensive line and Zeke was at the top of his game, and they won the division and they lost in the playoffs leagues, but they were a dominant run blocking team. They keep getting away from that. And I don't know why, because it's like, that's what you guys were. That's what you were. I mean, frankly, that's what they were back in the 90s when they were at the triplets. They were the dominant. I mean, for whatever else that team was, they dominated in the ground game. And you look at them and you go, okay, well, you guys should get back to that. And yet they keep going, we don't make this a Dak Prescott-centric offense. We want to throw the ball a ton downfield. We want to do all these things. Like, okay, that puts a lot of pressure on the defense. That's when you get into shootout games. And shootout games, as I've mentioned 100 times on the show over the years, are 50-50 propositions, even for the best offenses. So I'm like, you guys need to protect your defense. But I keep looking, I'm going, okay, Zeke, I wrote about this for The Athletic over the past couple of weeks. One of the things that Zeke has been over the past 3 years, he's seen his good blocking yards per attempt. It's a metric that measures how productive you are when you get good blocking. His good blocking yards per attempt went from really good to mediocre to last year. He was 41st out of 46 backs in that category. He was terrible. And I think that's why he's started to get back in better shape, because he realizes, if I don't get in better shape, Pollard was much better in good blocking yards per attempt, much more burst. I think Zeke realizes this. So if you've got Zeke and you've got Pollard, and you can give Pollard 100 carries, 150, and you're not going to wear the guy down at all, that's perfectly fine. 10 carries a game, he'll be able to deal with that. So if you've got those two there, and you need to protect your defense, and Dak Prescott now has the shoulder, he keeps having the shoulder problems, why aren't they going back to that approach? It doesn't seem like they're doing it, but I think soon enough they're going to have to wise up. It's McCarthy. He's done it before in Green Bay, to say, we need to run that same kind of setup there and stop trying to make this such a Dak Prescott aerial show, because that's not going to be the way we need to win.
Let's bounce over to the Giants. I feel like the Giants are the team that has the most question marks in the division because, one, their quarterback, nobody knows what the heck he is at this point. And two, I feel like every year it's, hey, the Giants need to improve their offensive line. Hey, the Giants need to improve their pass rush. And every year we're wondering what happened to the offensive line and what happened to the pass rush. And I'm still convinced they didn't replace Tomlinson on that D-line. So what do we make of the Giants with their questions coming into this season?
I think they know that they need to win the offensive defensive lines. I think they know they need to win that battle, and they're concentrating on it. They just don't have the players to do it. Their offensive line, they were 29th in good blocking rate last year. They were terrible. So I think they realized that that's what they need to do. Although I'll say this, the addition of Kenny Golladay, who unfortunately for them is banged up again during the preseason. So can you rely on the guy for a full 17-game season? But the addition of Kenny Golladay, if you get him back and Bark is, he's back, but is he, excuse me, is he going to be what he was before? Are they going to be able to bell cow him at all this year, or are they going to take it up week 4 to do it? But if you say, okay, well, Daniel Jones is great at running, very good at running the ball for a quarterback, and if he can start playing a little bit better, excuse me, you've got Golladay, you've got Barkley, you've got Ingram, you've got Shepard, you've got some other players and they're passing. You've got the makings, talent-wise, of a pretty good offense. And their defense also is not that bad of a defense. And Judge, I'll give him credit, I think he knows how to take I think he knows, okay, I need to accentuate what I do well, what our team does well. He's not going to go in there. He's from the Belichick theory of, okay, I don't need to force my team to play a particular system. I'm going to adjust my system to what we do well. So they've got the makings of having a pretty good team, especially on offense. And again, they don't want to get the shootout games, but they could do whatever they want on offense if they can get their blocking. And they put a lot of investments in their offensive line, but they've got to have that offensive line stabilized. Because if you're 29's a good blocker, I don't care if Barkley's back to what he was. You're not going to go anywhere.
Let's go over to Washington. Obviously, Washington, great front seven, right? They elite front seven of players. But the question is the offense. You add Curtis Samuel, another year with Antonio Gibson, the offensive line, not 100%. Ryan Fitzpatrick, what happens there? Washington, I feel like I know their defense. I know that defense is the top 5 defense in the NFL potentially, right? But the offense, that's the part that I'm wondering, can they get them more than 7 wins this year?
Big question mark there. And, Gibson I forget exactly, but I know he's close to the top 10 in good blocking yards per attempt. So he's makings a very good back. Their offensive line they've got talent for these teams it's not like even the Cowboys. All the NFC East teams are trying to build quality offensive lines. I still think, again, the Eagles probably the best offensive line coach in the division, which is a huge plus, which is why, Stoutland survived the transition. He's still there. And I think if he hadn't been there, he'd be gainfully employed somewhere else. But I think for Washington, the problem is that you've got Fitzpatrick, and I keep looking at him going, okay, well, Fitzpatrick he's a comet. He comes in and he Fitzmagic for 4 or 5 weeks, and he does exceptionally well, and he's really aggressive. And mind you, I think that offense could use some of that, but he always wears out. You always see him only play a few games, and then you've got to bench the guy. And I think that right now, look at him going, okay, well, if that doesn't work out with him, you're going to play Heineke. That's going to be your quarterback if it doesn't work out with Fitzpatrick. So if I'm Washington, I'm trying to find a way that I want to get what I can out of Fitzmagic, but I can't just have him play 4 or 5 games, because if that's the case, they're going to be dangerous for that stretch, and then he's going to throw 4 interceptions, and you're going to sit him on the bench, and you're going to put Heineke out there, and it doesn't matter how good that defense is. In this league, if you've got somebody like Heineke playing, and I know when he's done recently, and okay, maybe he's going to be that good, but we probably know what his ceiling is. And if he's playing like we'd expect Taylor Heineke to play, I don't care if you've got the great defense. You're just not going to put enough offense. And in this league, if you can't put up 20 points on a consistent basis, you're just going to have trouble going over 500.
KC Joyner, the football scientist, joining us here on 97.3 ESPN at KC Joyner TFS on Twitter. All right, KC, before I let you go, tell me the team or the position battle or the player that's outside the NFC East that you're watching very closely as we get started in 2021. Is there a team or a position battle? What is something that you're saying we got to keep an eye on this?
I want to see the Jets because I like what they're doing up there. They've got a really good coach, and one of the players I'm really looking at, I think he could change their offense and change the structure of where they can go and how dangerous they can be. I'm not saying they're going to win the division or anything of that nature, but we could probably see the Jets start to become a much better team. Is Michael Carter. Michael Carter, when he was in North Carolina, he did great on the field. I think it's 300-yard game, 308 yards against Miami. So he did great on the field. But the thing is, they named him team captain at one point. He won the UNC Strength and Conditioning Award, so the guy can hit the weight room. And he was only the 19th in UNC football player to be a 3-time all-academic, all-ACC pick. So the guy's really good at the books. It's why he's already running with the ones there. And if you take a guy like him, remember Bill Parcells said this about Curtis Martin years ago. when his personnel guy was saying, hey, we could sign Martin in free agency. You know, we're stacked at running back. Parcells like, whoa. He said, you can get Curtis Martin? He said, Curtis Martin, if we get him, he'll be the most talented guy we have. He'll be the hardest worker we have, and he'll be the best person that we have on this team. He said that will make everybody better. I don't want to put Carter into a Hall of Famers category yet for 100 reasons, but he brings a lot of those same things to the table, that you get him out there and he could be one of your best players. He could be your hardest worker, smart guy, can make the transition immediately. As a guy like him, people keep talking about the quarterback position, but you get a guy like him and you can put him in the backfield, and I don't know how many carries he can carry because he had a platoon set up at UNC, but if you can get him out there and make him even a lead back, it could change the dynamic of your offense, can help your defense, can help your ground game. I think he could be a difference maker. So I'm really paying a lot of attention to Michael Carter.
All right, Casey, before I let you go, tell the folks about Pay Dirt.
Pay Dirt. If you want to win your fantasy league, you really can't do so using the same recycled information that you use everywhere else. You need Pay Dirt, the subscription service that helped Phil and Jerry Hooton win $500,000 in the FFPC main event last year. You get an industry-leading draft guide. You get insanely detailed start-sit charts. You get waiver pick help 3 times a week, chats with me, and more. You can check it out at thefootballscientist.com. And if you use the discount code GIL, as in Mike Gill, the show we usually do, if you use the discount code GIL, you get 10% off any Pay Dirt subscription, again, at thefootballscientist.com.
KC Joyner, at KC Joyner TFS on Twitter, footballscientist.com. And as he said, you can hear him throughout the year on the Sports Bench. He was kind enough to join us for a little August conversation about football because, Casey, you know, football is my number one sport. You know, when football comes on, I love it. And no offense to baseball, basketball, hockey, but football is number one for me. So I always appreciate you jumping on.
Glad to be here. I appreciate it.